Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a truly fascinating essay that challenges some of our deepest, most ingrained ideas about human growth. We're diving into the original text, Lai Jisming Chanyuan, Life Chanyuan, Dao Yo, Shuifeng the Zhaohe, and Chuzor, the teachings and writings of Shuifeng, the guide of Life Chanyuan. Specifically, we'll be looking at an essay titled Honey and Bitterness. Now, our goal here isn't to take a side, but to neutrally examine how this text completely breaks down traditional wisdom. Let's explore a philosophy that asks us to totally rethink how we treat ourselves and the people around us.
Without experiencing bone-chilling cold, how could the plum blossom be so fragrant? I mean, you've probably heard this kind of thing all the time, right? Phrases like pressure makes diamonds or setbacks build character. It's this widespread belief that hardship is essentially a prerequisite for success. But Xu Feng argues that these cultural sayings might not be wisdom at all. In fact, he suggests they're more like viruses in society's bloodstream, ideas that actively prevent us from living healthy, happy lives.
Okay, let's dive into this, because Xu Feng doesn't just casually disagree with these proverbs, he sets out to dismantle them entirely, using logic, nature, and human psychology. He asks us to genuinely step back and question, is this perspective, that pain is somehow necessary for growth, actually correct? If we're constantly pushing children or ourselves into setbacks just to toughen up, are we really helping or are we just causing damage?
Here's our roadmap for how we'll unpack this argument today. First, the myth of hardship. Then, evidence from nature, followed by the psychology of praise. After that, we'll look at lessons from Life Qinyun, and finally, wrap it all up with choosing the honey.
Starting right off with part 1, the myth of hardship, and rethinking those cultural viruses.
So here is the core framework of the essay. Xu Feng essentially divides the entire human experience into two distinct categories, honey and bitterness. Honey represents all the good stuff, praise, encouragement, sweet words, and health. Bitterness, on the other hand, represents pressure, poverty, setbacks, and humiliation. The source claims that from a basic biological standpoint, human nature instinctively prefers honey. In his view, if someone actively chooses bitterness and criticism over praise and health, it actually indicates a malfunction at the spiritual level. Basically, we are naturally wired for the sweet things in life.
Which brings us to part 2, evidence from nature, fruits, plants, and desks. This is a simple yet surprisingly profound point from the text. Think about a piece of fruit. When a fruit gets bruised, when it takes a hit or a setback, it doesn't miraculously become stronger or more resilient, right? No, that specific bruised spot is exactly where it begins to decay and rot first. Unbruised fruits last so much longer. Shuifeng asks us to apply this exact logic to humans. If external strikes cause literal rot in nature, why on earth do we assume external pressures and setbacks will somehow make a human being thrive? And that brilliantly illustrates his next piece of evidence, an experiment involving two identical plants. Plant A was constantly praised with phrases like, "You are very beautiful," and "I love you." Plant B was cursed at with phrases like, "You are very ugly," and "You are about to die." The result? The praised plant experienced lush, vibrant growth, while the cursed plant just withered away and lost all its vitality. Xu Feng poses a really powerful question here. If constant defamation and criticism can destroy the vitality of a simple houseplant, what is it doing to the incredibly complex mental health of a human being? He brings this analogy even closer to human society by talking about school desks. We have all seen them, desks that has been hit, carved into with knives, and knocked over day after day. Over time, that desk doesn't transform into a perfect, hardened piece of furniture. It just becomes shaky, battered, and covered in pockmarks. The exact same rule applies to people. When people experience constant hits and carvings from life's hardships, Xu Feng argues they don't reach perfection. They literally just become deeply scarred.
Moving on to part 3, the psychology of praise, and specifically the Pygmalion effect.
Now, what's really interesting here is how this formalizes everything we just discussed using established science. It's called the Pygmalion effect. This is a psychological phenomenon where individuals literally develop in the direction that the masses and external expectations shape them. Basically, if society expects you to fail, you often do. If society expects you to succeed, you are far more likely to thrive. We are constantly molding people with our expectations. Applying the Pygmalion effect creates a pretty stark contrast. If everyone around a person constantly tells them, you are full of love or you are a great person, the probability of them actually becoming a great loving person skyrockets. Conversely, if society vilifies someone, constantly calling them scum or telling them they're full of hate, they will inevitably move toward becoming exactly that. Our words, our honey or our bitterness, actively create the reality of the people around us.
Next up, part 4, Lessons from Life Shen Yuan, looking at some personal evidence.
Xu Feng gets quite personal here, describing his own life as growing up in a honey jar. He was praised constantly. Adults called him smart, his teachers called him the phoenix in the sky. He became a village head by 18, was repeatedly chosen as class monitor, and later, as a teacher, was practically worshipped by students as King Gaesar. And now, as the guide of Life Shen Yuan, he receives daily praise. He asks his readers a very direct question: have I become bad? He uses this lifelong barrage of praise to impartially argue that endless positive reinforcement absolutely does not spoil a person.
Instead of spoiling him, he credits this complete lack of pressure and disparagement as the exact reason he was able to create Life Shen Yuan and the Second Home, initiatives he built out of pure love and a desire to make people live better. He also points to his son as evidence. Because he raised his son with praise and rarely gave him pressure, his son grew up with a remarkably sound mind, able to easily navigate relationships. The text notes his son effortlessly travels the world, the UK, Italy, Thailand, supported entirely by a global network of friends. All thanks to the honey.
Now, here's how Xu Feng addresses the inevitable counter-argument. He admits he isn't immune to hardship. He has absolutely tasted bitterness, deception, and blows in his life. But, and this is absolutely crucial, he emphatically states that this bitterness never built his character. It only ever left an indelible, ugly scar. When he reflects on the bitterness he's tasted, it doesn't inspire love or compassion in him. It only breeds feelings of hatred and cruelty. Hardship, in his view, really just reveals the ugly side of humanity.
To really cement this, he zooms out to an ultimate spiritual comparison. Heaven is defined by the absolute enjoyment of life's beauty with zero bitterness. Hell, on the other hand, is built entirely on insults, oppression, cruelty, and setbacks. Xu Feng poses a highly evocative rhetorical question here. Have you seen any ghosts evolving into celestial beings or Buddhas? In other words, suffering in hellish conditions doesn't spiritually elevate you. It literally just keeps you in hell. And finally, part 5, choosing the honey because life is short.
Let's circle right back to that cultural myth we started with at the beginning of our exploration. Remember the plum blossoms? He asks, does their fragrance actually come from the severe cold, or is it literally just their genetic structure? He points out that in the 1,000-year world, there are plum blossoms that have never suffered the torture of severe winter cold, yet they remain just as fragrant. The hardship was never the source of the beauty. The beauty was innate all along.
And so he leaves us with a stark moral binary. According to the essay, morally bankrupt individuals are the ones who insult, deceive, and harm others. Kind-hearted people? They're the ones who praise, inspire, and use sweet words. He compares it to walking into a room. Have you ever smelled a foul odor inside a beautiful flower house, or the fragrance of flowers in a pit latrine? The environment we create with our words dictates the reality we live in. Because life is just a few short decades, Xu Feng argues there is absolutely no reason to make people suffer or toil unnecessarily. Whether you become a wealthy star or remain entirely ordinary, life is just a fleeting, illusory bubble. So why not make it sweet? I'll leave you with the exact question Xu Feng uses to conclude his essay. As you go about your day, communicating with your family, your coworkers, and even yourself, honey or bitter water, which one will you choose?